The entangled streets of the gilded city offered little more than a subtle malaise. Darcy wanted out. This place was not meant for mortals, but she would force herself to trudge on. She must complete the spell. Another living statue, but more uncanny than the ones made of stone. Its rusty joints grind with each of its deliberate movements. A veritable treasure trove of potions and elixirs, and thanks to Anki, Kahara knew just how valuable these were. Kahara was able to read the Dark Priest like a children's book during their brief encounter at the tower. He could see that Anki was not the type to mince words ordinarily. That was until Kahara stroked his ego. Then there was no shutting him up about alchemy, occult trinkets, or anything else in regard to the dark arts. Kahara recognized this chamber from when he had previously visited it in the future. He didn't need to understand how exactly. He merely needed to profit from looting it twice. A brief survey of the city only revealed to Kahara that you can be lost even when you know where you are. Finding the man from Oldegard again would be a matter of luck. A familiar face. The ornate swine was filled with ash and all manner of bones, some appearing human. These metal creatures had been brutally dismembered, and there was unusual colored chunks of flesh and blood splattered around. At this point, Kahara was unfazed by the gore or the bizarre nature of these strange statues. Kahara's mind raced with the multitude of horrible intentions the grotesque Spider-Man could have for the girl. There was no time to lose, but he could not fit in the crevice. He had to find another way to wherever it had taken her. Kahara shared in the girl's disgust of the unnatural thing petting her. He would make it pay for this. Even though its body was set ablaze, it still managed to reach out and gently caress Kahara's face. A deep sense of revulsion resonated deep down from his core. He felt almost supernaturally violated. He could only imagine how the girl had felt. Soul stones that contain a soul are more valuable, another trick Kahara picked up from Anki. Beating the charred remains was cathartic. Kahara had never been so angry or relieved in his entire life. Darcy was getting nowhere fast, and was growing weary. Instructions in picking locks, but there was also strange arcane symbols inscribed in the parchment. Interesting, but not particularly helpful. Darcy pondered how long it would be before she joined the ranks of the Wandering Shades. Perhaps she already had. The smoldering remains appeared to twitch slightly. Darcy would not risk getting too close just in case. The encounter with the long-legged freak was a wake-up call for Kahara. Forget the map, he and the girl needed to get back to the surface. But without the cube, he was not even sure he could. Perhaps there was another way back to the present. That book the girl had did subvert time, just like the cube after all. After one last look at the vast city of the gods, Kahara could not help but feel tiny and insignificant. As curious as the dead giant was, the gate of Mahabra was all Kahara cared about right now. He must know what was beyond the threshold in this time. As if waking from a dream, they were back in the present. That was easier than he thought it would be. It was tempting to go back for the second treasure, but Kahara felt that he had pressed his luck long enough for one lifetime. Kahara hoped the traps would slow the monster down, at least until they make it to the stairs. Darcy felt it was safe to assume that something called a sorcerer's stone would prove useful if she planned to complete the spell. Furthermore, elixirs that could soothe one's troubled mind sounded rather delightful. More scrolls, but none that will aid in her task, unfortunately. Darcy was becoming disillusioned with her so far fruitless quest. She needed to rest, at least for a little while. But then a curious thought crossed her mind. She did not know how far in the past she had traveled. Maybe there was something she could do to prevent Lagarde's death. Yet again, the dungeon dashes her hopes. The wicked place takes everything and refuses to give anything back. Enki struggled with the temptation of the Golden Throne. The knowledge and the power was at his fingertips. But the cost. If he became the next Enlightened One, would he meet the same fate as Valtiel, to be usurped and forgotten, waiting for the next in line to slit his throat and erase him from history? Or could he do what the new gods before him could not? These texts about the Fellowship are different than those Enki was familiar with. But why would the new gods engage in historical revisionism? Why change the sex of the Forgotten One? Clearly the fools were trying to protect their fragile egos, but surely there was more to it. The Forgotten One was a scholar and a scientist. Was the goal of the revision to obscure the identity of the Fifth One? But to what end? He, or she rather, would be long dead, so what difference would it make? Unless they were still alive somehow. Enki needed more direct answers. The Fellowship had been defeated, but a new cycle had not begun. Maybe they have not passed on to the Hall of the Gods yet. Valtiel was a husk of his former self. Enki could not feel his power anymore. Even without a soul, his strange new god biology has prevented him from dying in the conventional sense. He can't even seem to end his own life. That aside, he brought up the fifth one on his own, but did not mention them dying. All of this points to the alchemist who had claimed to have studies that are centuries old down in the mines. Kahara and the girl had been wandering aimlessly through the mines for several hours, no exit in sight. Everything looked the same, and none of it familiar. Cave-ins blocked them in at every turn. Kahara was beginning to regret pulling the blue sword from the stone, almost as much as he regretted using that explosive back in Mahabra for treasure hunting. At least the sword allowed him to dispel the ghosts that were haunting these mines. Enki no longer had the luxury of Regenwalder, viciously slaughtering every ugly monster creeping in the dark. He would have to dig up some new allies to be on the safe side. Drudging up so many skeletons was mentally taxing, but very worthwhile. They could shield him from harm and wield weapons for him. This place has completely changed since the last time Enki was here. The god of the depths had been busy. Both Nosramis and most of her research was gone. There must be another lab somewhere. There was another passage on the other side of the water, but there was just two problems. Skeletons could not swim, and neither could Enki. He knew of an obscure spell for this sort of situation, but he did not actually know how to cast it. Fortunately, he had a hunch on where to learn it. Something about this tomb makes the dead restless, perhaps due to Alll-mer's strong presence. The spells were really taking a toll now, but Enki had what he needed to take the edge off. The solution was rather obvious. The statues were a complex mechanism to open the door. Seems there was more to it than that, but Enki was confident that he could unlock the passage before too long. The true nature of Alll-mer's ascension was truly mysterious. The strange floating monster was trying to invade Enki's mind, something he had no patience for. But each one continued where the other had left off, bombarding him with visions of an alien landscape bathed in green light, a sensation he would not soon forget. The spell Enki was seeking was not here. He mostly just found Alll-mer's teachings and religious doctrine. Even the old god, Rur, seeks the pure girl. Her significance could not be underestimated. The spell still eluded Enki, but there was one last chance to find it. Hopefully, over the next few centuries, one of Alll-mer's devotees will place a copy of the spell in his tomb. If not, he may need to learn to swim, a thought that did not thrill Enki due to his weak constitution. Not to mention there could be other sea dragons or other dangers lurking in the murky waters below. The moon god's servant had departed. Time truly is moot in the face of an old god like Rur. He knew of the strange girl nearly a millennia before her birth. Enki did not want to waste any more time with any servants of the god of the depths. At last, Enki could merely stroll across the surface of the water, and as a bonus, he now had a sustainable source of food and wine. At this point, Kahar and the girl were hopelessly lost. He had lost all sense of time as well. All he knew was that their supplies and food were dwindling. Maybe what that dark priest had said was true. Maybe they really were in the entrails of some dark god. It must not want them to escape. It was only a matter of time. Kahara would need to sleep too. The crow was back, and it had them cornered. The only way out was through. The beast's mauls shattered Kahara's bones like glass while swarms of birds clawed at his face and eyes. The deep slashes and roaring flames barely slowed the relentless crow down. Another devastating blow left Kahara on the brink of death, but at least now the crow was disarmed. They still have a chance. Or so he thought. The terrible crow stalked Kahara even in his dreams. Maybe it wasn't a nightmare, but a premonition. Kahara would not make the same mistake of fighting the crow head-on, not this time. With that limp, it shouldn't be able to catch them anymore. These lizard men are even more prevalent in the dungeons than Enki had originally thought. While he was interested in their ancient culture, he was not interested in being skinned like livestock. Nosramus must have some sort of alliance with the lizards, or maybe they serve her out of fear. If what she said about Lagarde was true, all new gods are not created equally. But more importantly, Enki now had the tools he needed to glimpse the knowledge of the new gods, without paying the price. Darcy awoke with a new sense of clarity. She had been naive. She thought she could simply come here and save Lagarde, and then ride off into the sunset together. That she wouldn't let the dungeons have their way with her. That she would hold fast to her high morals. But where did those lofty beliefs get her? Fate had mocked her at every turn, leaving her a lost little damsel in distress. A petty role she had strived her whole life to rise above. But the sad truth was, the dungeons had already had their way with her, and she just didn't care anymore. The old her would have scoffed at the notion of using black magic, but not anymore. She would embrace the darkness and take what she wants by any means. It would seem the path had been opened. Regenwalder's handiwork, no doubt. It was possible he had killed the last new god and left the city already. Enki had spoken of a great library. He may be there. It would be prudent to search for the library after investigating the king's temple. These beasts could not frighten Darcy or stand in her way. She had seen far worse than overgrown puppies in this hellish place. Another heart of the God of the Depths, just as Enki had said. It was clear to Darcy who the real king of Mahabra was. The God of Darkness rules this city. It probably always has. This must be Buckman's dark night. No harm in telling him where his comrades are waiting for him. Darcy was indifferent to the kingdom and its knights at this point, but she rather talked some sense into him than risk injury. The air is thick and unbearable to breathe. Every breath he takes burns Anki's lungs. It feels like he is suffocating, yet he does not die. Maybe he does not even need to breathe in this warped dimension. It was like wading through purgatory. Time had no meaning here. The green hue, just like the vision in Alll-mer's tomb. The same as where the Lady of the Moon originated. This is where the old gods resided. What a pitiful, twisted creature. Every movement and sound is marked by agony. How does anything survive here? Maybe nothing does. Maybe they simply exist. The massive reptile-like creature has no eyes and radiates fear. Its aura is incredible. It exceeds Francois and the other new gods. It was the jaws of death. Anki could not afford to let it get close. Even after all the blood magic and the virulent poison, the enormous creature did not die. It merely left to lick its wounds. No matter which direction he went, it always led back to the throne, as if this place was folded in on itself. Navigating this place was impossible. This feeling, it was absolutely overwhelming. Nothing Enki had experienced before could even be compared. The new gods and the terrifying blind beast that roamed this void were simple insects. This was a true god of old. This was Sylvian. But this was not even the goddess in all of her glory. Her form was twisted and degenerated, like an echo or a footprint left behind after Sylvian had treaded here. Just a trace of the old god after she departed, but even still, with nothing but a mere passing thought, it could crush him into oblivion. But instead of destroying him outright, it was like she was toying with Enki, poking and prodding him out of curiosity, and humoring his feeble attempts at resistance. It was as if Sylvian's traces were trying to communicate something beyond a mortal's understanding. Having failed to impart her intentions, the traces of Sylvian vanished. Enki now started to realize why the old gods departed. Because on a fundamental level, man could not comprehend the gods, nor could the gods comprehend man. This is what Nosramus meant by reflection. Enki now understood what ascension as a new god truly meant. Kill your ego. Leave your flesh behind. Let me continue your ambitions. The countless pitiful shambling husks roaming about. It all made sense now. Ascension was a lie. There is no ascension. There is only replacement, followed by an eternity of suffering in this timeless void. But regardless of that fact, Enki wanted it. He wanted the knowledge, the power, the longevity, all of it, even if it was a lie, even if it was insignificant compared to just the traces of an old god. Enki wanted it so bad he could taste it. He need only reach out his hand and submit. Kahara had been rationing their food, but they were down to a single scrap of smoked meat. Hardly enough for one person, let alone both of them. But a solution, sickening as it may be, had presented itself to Kahara. It was the cannibals Darcy warned him about. He was desperate enough to eat human flesh, but he did not want to subject the girl to that, or risk one of the wolf masks attacking her. The meat was raw and revolting, but Kahara could not restrain himself until he ate his fill. He wasn't sure if he could live down what he had just done, but he would, at least, live. Darcy didn't understand. It seemed as if Anki had been expecting her, somehow. He already knew her intentions and even helped her, but at the same time, he could not be bothered with her. It was unclear to Darcy how Anki was still in the past. He had even claimed the Grand Library as his own. Had he become a new god of enlightenment as the former new gods had suggested? Whatever the case may be, it was irrelevant to her personally. All that mattered to her was that it was possible to complete the spell. The library's contents were incredibly vast. Days and weeks rolled by. Progress was slow, and Anki did not lift a finger to aid in her search. However, he was kind enough to leave bread out for her every evening, for which Darcy was very grateful, even if it was moldy. During her time at the Grand Library, Darcy learned much about the old gods. In particular, she read many tomes about Grogaroth the Destroyer and Sylvian the Creator. At last, Darcy had all the components of the spell, Resurrection of the Beloved. She did not know how many years had passed. She stopped keeping track after about 3. But it was finally finished. The monotonous toil in the musty old library was finally over. She could finally be with Lagarde. Darcy wanted nothing more than to start a new life someplace far from the cruelty of the dungeon, but she was devoted wholeheartedly to Lagarde. She told herself that she wanted whatever he wanted. Lagarde appeared to retain his mind and memories, unlike with lesser forms of necromancy. In that regard, his resurrection was successful, but it came at a cost. His body was racked with constant pain. His exposed flesh was covered in weeping sores and boils. His breathing was labored, and he staggered about with a severe limp. But he didn't seem to mind, not as long as he could reach the throne. Darcy was in awe that Lagarde's convoluted plan had somehow come to pass. She would join him. They could rule as new gods together. They could fulfill the prophecy. They could unite all of mankind. Then, all the suffering would truly have been worth it. Finally, something Kahara recognized. The cave dweller village was near. They would have food they can steal. No, 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 not again. Anything but him, Kahara screamed in his mind. The murderous crow's leg had even been fully restored. Fighting it was hopeless. They had to run. All of the dwellers had been savagely ripped limb from limb. Kahara didn't know what happened here, and he did not care. This just made taking their food and supplies easier, and they had no time to waste. The crow could be on their heels any moment. Not a single scrap of food in sight. Whatever killed them must have pillaged everything. Kahara didn't understand why the cat just let them go, and wouldn't give it a chance to change his mind. There was no time to think on it anyway. They needed to keep moving, or they could be trapped between the crow and the cat. Hunger may catch up with them before the crow does. There was nothing left anywhere. The idea of cooking the cave dweller's flesh was starting to become appealing. A dog-faced abomination lunged from the darkness, catching Kahara off guard. Worse yet, they were flanked now. Kahara shoved the girl out of the way, and desperately attempted to distract both of the foul beasts. Now he knew what became of the cave people, and he did not want to join them. Kahara had always relied on the element of surprise to defeat the dungeon's monsters. Without that advantage, the situation was dire. If only Darcy was here to watch his back. It was a miracle that he managed to fight his way past the godforsaken things, but he was too injured to keep fighting. The poor girl was scared out of her wits, and her torch was failing. All she could do was hope that Kahara would find her again. Deep down, Kahara knew. There was no going back after this. Darcy was still human. She didn't understand. Why had she not ascended? Why didn't it work? And where was Lagarde? All of these thoughts raced through her head, but soon she was distracted by the hostile environment. Her eyes were burning. The air was like fire on her skin and in her chest, but there was no turning back. She would have to push through the pain and find Lagarde. The naked bird was easily beheaded by Darcy's blood arts, but it continued to flail without its head and managed to slash her before collapsing. The wounds were deep. The old Darcy may have succumbed to blood loss. But now these injuries were of little consequence. This place was corrosive to both the body and the mind. Darcy would need to calm herself in order to utilize the array of spells she learned in the Grand Library. While hiding in the hole, Darcy was able to spot the massive creature that was stalking her. After a short while, it disappeared into the darkness it emerged from. Darcy was starting to get used to the sulfurous air and the mind-numbing green light. She searched far and wide for Lagarde, but the void was so immense. Before long, the huge beast caught her scent again. She could not avoid it any longer, so she would just have to kill it instead. Nothing was going to stand in her way. With a small knife, Darcy cuts her hand, and chants a short phrase to call upon the power of Grogaroth. The blood on the ground begins to bubble and grow into a fleshy golem. Next, she called upon Sylvian, causing the golem to secrete irresistible pheromones. The terrible lizard entered a frenzy of rage and lust, which drew all of its focus to the golem as she bombarded it with black orbs. But it wasn't quite enough to finish off the monster. Quickly downing some whiskey relieved just enough mental strain to unleash the final blow. The beast limped away with its tail between its legs. Darcy almost considered hunting it down to finish the job, but Lagarde was all she could think about. The pathetic creatures roaming this hellscape did not interest Darcy in the least. At last, she found him, and his former beauty had been restored. No, he was even more beautiful. Darcy was profoundly disappointed when she came to. Lagarde was not with her. She had been a fool again. The creature that emerged from his skin did not love her, nor did the new god in the void. Neither was the man she loved. She had been used and abandoned. She would not be his fool any longer. Kahara was gravely wounded and at risk of bleeding out. He managed to bandage his arm and was about to try a blue healing elixir when he heard a faint whisper. The walls were grotesque, fleshy, and palpitated like intestines. Everything reeked like shit and sulfur. But there was a silver lining. The dog-faced freaks could not track their scent. Deadly traps were placed haphazardly everywhere. There was no rhyme or reason to it. Then Kahara realized that the traps were just here to help the Dark God chew its food. A ridiculous amount of explosives. Fate had spit in Kahara's eye. It was a cruel joke that they could no longer use these to escape through the catacomb stairwell. It was the crow again. Against all common sense and reason, it was somehow waiting for them. But now it was twice as ugly. There was nowhere to run or hide, and the crow knew it. It just stood there, waiting patiently. They had to kill it. There was no other way. Kahara would need every possible advantage. If it was just going to stand there staring and mocking them with its eyes, then they would seize the opportunity to blind it. Even blinded, burned, and suffering from poison, the horrible freak managed to graze Kahara with its gnarled great maul, just enough to break a few ribs. But finally, the crow buckled and fell. Its smoldering remains began to attract swarms of insects. That sound, it couldn't be. Kahara and the girl were not about to stay and find out if the crow monster had gotten back up again. Kahara was exhausted and starving. This place was wearing him down. His reflexes were starting to slow, enough for a simple spike trap to gash his leg. The injuries he had accumulated in this horrendous gauntlet were adding up, but he needed to keep moving forward. He had to get the girl out. He needed to make it back to Celeste. As imposing as the dogmen were, they were no match for the blue sword's flames or the poison dagger. As long as they were able to sneak attack them before they could strike back, at least. Now there was even giant boulders rolling around at set intervals, and that didn't even make any sense. Kahara felt foolish for even trying to make sense of it. The whole place operated like a bad dream, and not like reality. Now there was poisonous fumes to contend with. They had to get out of this room fast before they pass out. Kahara didn't even know what he was looking at anymore. All the more reason to kill it as swiftly as possible. Countless rotting corpses were twisted together, every face more contorted from agonizing torment than the last, piled up like so many cobblestones, forming a bridge into the dark nothingness. With every step, their feet sank deeper into the putrid heap of death, as maggots crawled up their legs. It was a dead end. There was nowhere left to go. Kahara's nose began to bleed. The girl's pain was unbearable. Kahara wanted to ease her suffering, but he didn't know how. No words could capture this feeling. Kahara felt both indescribable terror and joyous rapture at the same time. Pain radiated through every inch of his body. He wanted to run away, but he could not pry his eyes off the newborn god. Instinct began to take over. He flailed about, swinging his sword wildly. Fear and hunger didn't even notice the blade tear open her otherworldly flesh. It was less than nothing compared to her own personal pain. Kahara grabbed the brown vial from his satchel and downed it in one gulp. It would temporarily enhance his strength and reflexes, enough to escape. But he could still not look away from fear and hunger. He could not run from her. Kahara's stomach felt like it was being torn asunder. He started coughing up blood. He was starting to share her endless pain and her bottomless hunger. With reckless abandon, he swung his sword again. It didn't matter. Fear and hunger thrashed about as she continued to change. She didn't even realize she had bludgeoned Kahara. Blood ran down Kahara's cheeks as he cried for the girl. He continued to randomly swing his sword. It was meaningless. Fear and hunger spasmed in pain, her many new limbs bombarding Kahara with utter indifference. Noxious miasma filled the air, searing his lungs, blurring his vision. Blood trickled down from Kahara's ears as he struggled to drink a blue potion, desperate to alleviate the pain. In a futile last bid, he lashed out with his blade, setting the god ablaze. Fear and hunger was like a roaring star. She did not even feel the flames, but her pure fire seared Kahara's flesh. And then their eyes met. The sum of all of man's fears lacerated Kahara's mind. He could no longer comprehend what was happening. He mindlessly swung his sword and choked down potion after potion. The infinite weight of true divinity bared down on Kahara. This singular moment was already decided an eternity before his birth. For his fate was always to bear witness to her true ascension. Fear and hunger had influenced man from the very beginning, crafting a pure and perfect vessel for her own physical birth, from an innocent child who, except for one man's kindness, knew only fear and hunger. Kahara felt like he knew this man from somewhere. Kahara wasn't sure who this man, or maybe woman, was, but he simply felt like he could trust their words. The gate was open, like the passage itself was expecting someone. This city, it is as if it was ripped from a dream, or maybe a nightmare. Kahara didn't know where he was going, but his feet seemed to know where to take him. It was so uncanny, almost nostalgic. Chilling words, but Kahara's fine eastern blade cleaved him in two like a sheet of paper. It was strange. Kahara could not seem to remember where he had gotten the sword, but the thought quickly faded when he started counting the silver he had reclaimed from Isaiah. Kahara just sort of knew that it would be fine to jump down. He was confident that he could find another way back. Kahara remembered hearing a rumor that the expensive blue aphrodisiac powder that the nobility indulged in was from the remains of a strange creature. Maybe it was true after all. What an unbelievable stroke of luck. Kahara was extremely pleased that his hunch about the treasure maps paid off. It was almost too convenient that he had found that explosive laying around. Kahara could not help but feel that fate was on his side. Kahara wanted nothing to do with the walking corpse. Good thing it was slow. It was nothing but smooth sailing from here, but something seemed off. An overwhelming feeling of dread began to creep slowly into Kahara's mind. Thoughts of the little girl from his dream began to fill his head. Tears began to flow like an uncontrollable torrent down his face. He couldn't fully understand why. The hair on the back of Kahara's neck stood on end. He felt like something was following him. But there was nothing there. He could feel eyes all around him, watching him, waiting for him. For just a brief moment, the small part of the god of fear and hunger that was the little girl wept for the man she had come to love as a father, while he took his very last breath.